أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبو الزهراء المصطفى أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه المبين وهو أصدق القائلين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم تر كيف ضرب الله مثلا كلمة طيبة كشجرة طيبة أصلها ثابت وفرعها في السماء تؤتي أكلها كل حين بإذن ربها ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس لعلهم يتذكرون. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala greaten your reward and my reward and our reward altogether for coming to these gatherings and mourning and commemorating the greatest sacrifice that this world and this earth has ever seen. First and foremost, I would like to take permission from Maulana for the fact that I'm reciting in front of them and they are my senior. And number two, for inviting me here to come and address and be part and parcel of this community in Michigan, which I've heard so much about. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajun. It would be no exaggeration for me to say that literally, on my way here to be in front of you, it's really a miracle, because I arrived yesterday and the intention was to address you yesterday. But unfortunately we were in a car accident, nothing to do with our fault, but we ended up in hospital. So I apologize for not being in front of you yesterday, purely because we were undergoing CT scans and so forth. So apologies for that, but alhamdulillah, they say that and this is probably, as far as I'm concerned, the reason why we are still okay in a single piece, because the way that the accident happened, there was no way, to be honest with you, that my survival was intact or anybody else's. But subhanallah, when you come out to recite the zikr of none other than the zikr of Ahlul Bayt and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is your protector. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And I firmly believe that the reason why we survived and the reason why I'm in front of you today, after having an accident which there were 3 impacts, and the car spun the way it did, it's just a miracle. So I, again, would praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He's prolonged my life and those that were with me to allow us to continue, those that came to receive me so that I could address you, and looked after me so that I'm here and able and well. Let's have a loud salawat for them, and also inshallah for yourselves. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajahum. Indeed, all praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is mankind? A fickle being, He comes and He goes. I know that you had Maulana before me for the first 10 to 12 days, who was literally, I think, addressing you on the topic of death. And it's a topic which is very, very relevant, and sometimes you need to taste, a little bit of it just to remind you how fickle life is. You make all your preparations, And sometimes it's a really important aspect of life which reminds you all it takes is somebody else's mistake and you can prepare and make plans. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained for you not to leave this world at that time, nothing can change that. And if He has, also nothing can change that. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala indeed that truly He has blessed me with allowing me to continue to do the zikr, which is the greatest zikr of all zikrs. In essence, the zikr of Allah through Abu Abdullah Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farjah. So inshallah, we have a majalis today, inshallah we have 2 tomorrow, and inshallah the 2 the day after. And we have inshallah majalis here in the evenings, and inshallah in the relevant houses of those individuals, our dear brothers who have taken the effort to hold the majalis in their homes. But what I want to do, and I would like to do, is not to just talk disconnected. I also want to have a theme, something that is of benefit for those people who attend each and every day. So I would encourage you to, inshallah, attend the majlis held at Muqit Uncle's house, and also the one thereafter during the day, and also in the evenings. And the reason is because there will be a running theme. And those of you that can attend, and I know weekends are big here, right? You guys have the days off. If you can, inshallah, you will be able to, inshallah, see the full picture, inshallah, that I'm trying to present before you. And what I'm, inshallah, intending to deliver is literally on the topic, in essence, that what is it that makes us who we are? Why are we the way we are? And this is a question that a 5-year-old kid can ask himself, a grown adult can ask himself, somebody at the later ages can ask themselves, male or female can ask themselves, why am I the person that I am right now? Why am I the way I am? What is it that makes me who I am? And this is in essence a very essential question, because we need to understand these types of questions of what makes me who I am, to be able to modify, alter, and determine who it is that I am. Do I have any control about who I am, or is it something that's already a foregone conclusion? Is there an ikhtiyar that I have, or there is no ikhtiyar? Do I have a choice or not? And if I do, what is that choice? Is it unlimited? Is it limited? What are the parameters that govern? Because I'm sure you all know the 10 days that we've mourned so far, and this is a very important point. The 10 days that have already gone, the first 10 days, they were a build-up. People think on the day of Ashura, that's it, we're done. And you'll see that because people leave. Our Imam Bargahs, our Hussainiyas become empty once again. But the real tragedy is this, that Ashura was the day actually everything began. Not that it ended on that day. The 10 days leading up to that were in fact the days building up to Ashura. The events and the tragedy of Ashura started on the 10th, but didn't end that day. So, with that in mind, we also have to understand that the message of coming here is indeed to mourn without a doubt. But if that's all we've done, and we are the exact same people as far as character and who we actually are, is exactly the same when we started to when we are where we are right now, then understand that those tears have really not benefited us. And they are in our benefit. We are doing nothing for the sake of Abu Abdullah. We are doing it for ourselves. Look at how Kareem, how generous Imam al-Hussein actually is. Even in his mourning, it's in our benefit. even in the recitation of his tragedy, even in coming to these majalis, all of that is in our benefit for this world and also in the hereafter. Please recite one loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So let us start today, inshallah. I've had the great honor and the great privilege of reciting two verses 24 and 25, for those of you taking note, inshallah, of Surah Ibrahim, chapter number 14. At the beginning of this majlis. Verse number 24, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, do you not see how Allah illustrated the example of a sacred word? Let me read the Arabic to you once more. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alam tara kayfa dharaba Allahu mathalan kalimatan tayyibatan kashajaratin tayyibatin asluha thabitun wa far'uha fis sama. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, do you not see how Allah illustrated the example of a sacred word? Kalimatin tayyibatin. A sacred word. Kalimatan tayyibatan. A sacred word. Being like, this sacred word is being compared to a sacred tree. Shajaratin tayyibatin. This sacred word is like a sacred tree. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to give us a comparison, a similitude, something for us to compare and contrast. Allah then goes on subhanahu wa ta'ala to describe this tree. He says, أَسْلُحَا ثَابِتٌ وَفَرْعُهَا فِي السَّمَاءِ. Its roots are embedded, solidly grounded, fixed firmly into the ground. And its branches reach into, not the skies, but the heavens. So this particular tree that I want us to bring our attention towards is something which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is drawing our attention towards. The very next verse, verse 25 of Surah Ibrahim, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes something else with reference to this particular tree. He states, تُؤْتِي أُكُلَهَا كُلَّ حِينٍ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهَا وَيَضْرِبُ اللَّهُ الْأَمْثَالَ لِلنَّاسِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَذَكَّرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this particular tree that I've just given you the example of, whose roots are extremely firm and solid within the ground, and whose branches reach high up until the heavens, this particular tree bears fruit at all times. You know, normally a tree gives fruit how often? Once a year, right? Seasonal. But this particular tree that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about says it's continuously producing its fruits by the leave of its lords. تُؤْتِي أُكُلَهَا كُلَّ حِينٍ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهَا. It provides and produces the fruits at all times, continuously, by the leave of its Lord. وَيَضْرِبُ اللَّهُ الْأَمْثَالَ لِلنَّاسِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَذَكَّرُونَ. Very important final statement of this particular verse. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala illustrates examples for the people, you and me, in order that we may understand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't just give this example and want us to read and move on. Not at all. He wants us to think, ponder and reflect. And my dear brothers and sisters, just to gain an idea of the importance, of how important these words are, with reference to this particular verse, we have Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajahum, who narrates of and narrates from the Holy Prophet of Islam, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajah. With reference to this particular verse, and states that I am, the Holy Prophet says, I am the root of this sacred tree. Ali is its trunk. My divinely chosen Ahlul Bayt are its branches, and the pious followers of my Ahlul Bayt are its vegetation. Vegetation can be in a number of forms, right? Who has seen a tree? What is the zina of a tree? What is the adornment or a decoration of a tree? An adornment of a tree is what? Its leaves, its flowers, and its fruits. If a tree is produced and it has roots, a trunk and branches, but it doesn't produce a single flower, leaf, or a fruit, what would we say? That this tree never reached the potential intended by the person who placed the seed into the ground. It grew, it developed, but it didn't reach the potential for why it was intended. Who places and plants a tree for it just to make branches and a trunk and roots? No, a tree is planted for a particular purpose, either for the shade of its leaves, or the fragrance of its flowers, or the benefits and the nutrients of its fruits. So when we have a tree which is bare and barren, and we have a tree which is lush and green and has flowers and fruits, what would we say? Which one would we rather see? The one which is productive. The Holy Prophet is referring to you as the produce and the zina and the adornment of that tree. This tree, this sacred tree. Furthermore, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, who was being quoted by Imam al-Radha alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajum, states that his grandfather, Amir al-Mu'mineen, stated this, that the root, the trunk, and the branches are in essence the essential part of what makes a tree. Roots, trunk, and branches. Likewise, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, if Islam is compared to a sacred tree, sincere belief, true faith, is ingrained in the heart and the mind of a believer. Sincere faith or sincere belief in the true faith is ingrained in the heart and the mind of a believer. The root is its true faith. That is the essence. That's where it starts from. And if we look, when it comes to our faith, what do we call the very fundamentals of our faith? We call it the Asul ad-Din, right? The roots of the faith. Amir al-Mu'mineen is now making that comparison. He's saying, sincere belief in true faith, ingrained in the heart and the mind of the believer, is the root. The declaration, the shahada, is its trunk. Yeah? We don't see our aqaid. Zahiriyan, on the apparency, do we see the aqaid that we all hold? No, we don't. It's something that's hidden. It's within us. What we see is a declaration. Then Amir al-Mu'mineen says that the practice of the prescribed religious laws are its branches. Isn't this the Furu ad-Din? Indeed they are. The branches of the faith. Then Amir al-Mu'mineen says an important thing. And this is very important because we believe sometimes we become into this notion that our faith is what? I can see the vast majority are Urdu speakers, so I'm going to just divulge a little bit. Ke deen jo hai hamara, our religion is our faru, is our branches. मैंने नमाज पढ़ ली, मैंने रोजा रख लिया, I've read my prayers, I've kept my fast, I've done hajj and zakat, and that's it. I am guaranteed to go to heaven now. But this is still just the branches. Remember, we said a tree has not reached its potential for why it was embedded based on roots, trunk, and the branches. It's the flowers, the leaves, and the fruits that this tree produces. That's the real aim and the ambition. So if I'm content and say, I read my namaz, and I do my hajj, and I do my zakat, and my khums, and that's it, my branches are very strong, we are still looking at what? A bare tree. And every single one of us, inshallah, agreed that we want to see a productive tree, not a bare tree, right? The real intention was to see a fruitful tree, a productive tree. Amir al-Mu'mineen then goes on and says that the rewards and the benefits of this tree are indeed the beauty and the perfection produced by the flowers and the leaves and the fruits. So what are these? What are the leaves and the flowers and the fruits that we should be looking towards producing? Again, the Holy Prophet of Islam comes to our aid, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajahum, and gives us the answer. He says, Islam is the sacred tree. Belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is its roots. Salah, Saum, Zakat, Khums, and Jihad are its branches. Reliance upon Allah. Tawakkul ala Allah. The reliance upon Allah. Good manners, akhlaq, piety, God consciousness, taqwa, and abstinence from whatever is forbidden. These are the fruits, the flowers, and the leaves of our tree. So might Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajahum. Now, if we are performing all of these actions in our daily lives, and we are just simply content that I have been to Hajj, I am Haji, I am one of those who prays, I come and do my prayers, and I am one of those who was given sadaqah and khums and zakat, and I do all of the other aspects. I fast during the month of Ramadan. But as soon as I'm disengaged with these, I become nothing more than my own God after that. In other words, we believe that the deen is in ibadat. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Holy Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt are teaching us what? No, the deen, the real faith, iman, is where? In mu'amalat. It's in our interactions. Hence the reason why the zina, the decoration of our tree, is in what? Let me repeat once again. And if we have a tree which does not have these fruits and flowers and leaves, then our tree is also bare, even though we may be of those who have established prayers, even though we may be of those who have given zakat and khums and all the rest of it, and been on hajj. If our tree is devoid of these adornments of decoration, then our tree is also bare. And we have also not fulfilled the potential by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended us to grow into this world. Again, tawakkul ala Allah, reliance upon God. Number 2, good manners, akhlaq. If we have no akhlaq, and there are many traditions that say, the one who has no akhlaq has no deen, has no religion. Piety, God consciousness, taqwa. We've just had the day of taqwa before us. The day of Friday, the day of Jum'ah, where we come and pray, is in essence to enliven God consciousness, taqwa within us. What does taqwa mean? Being conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I leave my prayers and I go into my family or into my work and I have no consciousness of Allah, I'm only conscious of Him when I'm praying, and then again, my branch is there, but it's not producing any fruits, flowers, or leaves. Abstinence from whatever is forbidden. Subhanallah. It's not saying that you do the extra. It's not saying doing the good. It's not saying that. It's saying abstinence from that which is forbidden. If I'm praying and I'm fasting and I'm going on Hajj and doing all of these things, but I'm still indulged heavily in all types of sin, then all of these things have been of no benefit. They're just acts that I'm doing without any relevance in my life. Namaz par li, Allah ko yaad kar liya, now it's me and my life. I've prayed, I've done what I need to do, now it's just me and my life. I'll govern that the way I deem fit. I'll interact with my family the way I see fit. No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making you pray, commanding you to pray, not for His benefit, for your benefit. Hence the reason why Imam al-Hussein, even in his final moments, is where? He's in sujood. Reminding us, nothing matters but Him. Nothing is important but Him. Please recite aloud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There are many, many lessons for us to learn from this particular similitude that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. We have indeed, in the very next verses, I mentioned 24 and I mentioned 25. Now let's come on to 26 and 27. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't just give us one side of the story. He gives us both sides of the story. He says, and the Holy Prophet also refers to this, referring now to verse number 26. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَمَثَلُ كَلِمَةٍ خَبِيثَةٍ كَشَجَرَةٍ خَبِيثَةٍ اجتثت من فوق الأرض ما لها من قرار. ما لها من قرار. And the example now that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us is this. He says, we've talked about this sacred word and this sacred tree. Let's now come to the example of the filthy word, which is like that of a filthy tree. كلمة خبيثة كشجرة خبيثة اجتثت من فوق الأرض ما لها من قرار. It is torn up by the root from the surface of the earth and it has no stability. So this filthy tree, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this tree has been torn up by its roots. And we know what is the stabilizing factor for a tree. It's its roots. That's what keeps it stable. And verse 27. يثبت الله الذين آمنوا بقول الثابت في حياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة ويذل الله الظالمين ويفعل الله ما يشاء. Allah will establish in strength those who believe with the word that stands firm in this world and the hereafter. But Allah will leave to stray those who do wrong, dhalimeen. Allah does what He wills. Now, why have I taken this painstaking effort to, in detail, recite to you these 4 verses? Because for everything there needs to be a foundation. What I'm going to be talking about in these next few nights and days is in essence these 4 verses and how relevant these 4 verses are to who we are. Remember I said, the aim is we go to establishing and understanding, why am I the way that I am? The Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, has mentioned very clearly and said that the parable of this filthy tree refers to Bani Umayyah. And has also stated that the parable of the sacred tree refers to Islam, the Holy Prophet, and his Ahlul Bayt and the Shia, which is, inshallah, you and us. And the filthy tree refers to the enemies of Islam and the enemies of the Holy Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt and even you and I. We just heard earlier on, we recited the Surah Al-Fatiha for those who were massacred today in Iraq and in Karachi. These 2 trees are still alive today. These 2 trees are very relevant. This similitude, this example hasn't just come about because we said, and we know the Quran is there for every single time, every single place, in every single era. And its relevance is also there. What can we understand from this? What is the relevance of these 2 trees? And why has one been referred to very specifically as Banu Umayyah and those who are the enemies of none other than the Holy Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt and yourself and myself, inshallah, as those who follow them? Now, the relevance, my dear brothers and sisters, comes here. And this is the real point. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this similitude and this example based for one reason. There is a real significance, a real similarity to the life of a tree and you and me. I've kind of shown you that in the simple aspects with reference to our faith. But it's even more simpler than that. For example, we know that a tree starts its life how? As a seed. Where? Placed into soil. When this seed goes into the belly of Mother Earth, these 2 are essentially the components which will determine the growth, seed and soil, which will determine the growth and the development, and also dictate the quality of the roots, the trunk, the branches, the leaves, the flowers, and the fruits. For example, if I have a seed of very good quality, prime quality, but I put it into an earth which has no nutrients, no minerals, no salts, in fact, it's completely barren, will that seed become a tree fruit bearing? No. In fact, that very case of the seed won't even break. Why? Because where it's placed is essential. It might have all the most highest quality of standards within it. Genetically, it may be the most refined grain around. But if the soil is weak and not of good quality, that seed won't reach its potential. And vice versa. I may have the best soil in the world, a land and earth which is full of nutrients and quality. It is full of all the benefits that are required to germinate that seed. But the seed that I place within it is full of fault and defect and mutation. Again, will it reach its potential? No. Because the seed is at fault here. Please recite one loud salawat. So both seed and soil will in essence affect the final produce. If there's a defect at the seed level or at the soil level, there will be a defect in the fruit and the flowers and the leaves that are produced. So this is one aspect. So this stage that we talked about is called the primary germinating phase. These factors are referring to seed and soil. And we can see how important this is. Now let's just say I have the most perfect seed, and I also have found for it the most perfect soil. I place the seed within the soil. Is that now sufficient for this seed to become that beautiful tree, which is productive? No. Because you will say, there are other factors. And the second factors, or the second set of factors, can be grouped into the environmental factors. For example, if I have the perfect seed and the perfect soil, but I have no sunlight, I have no essence of life, which is water. And remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I created every single thing from water. If I don't have the essential source of life, nor the guiding sunlight to direct the stalk towards the light, and the stems becoming the roots, guiding towards a place which allows the trunk to form and the roots to solidify. And also with that, the environment and the atmosphere. So the sun's there, the water's there, but there's no carbon dioxide, there's no oxygen. For me to be able to allow that seed and soil to take on the potential to grow. All of these are limiting factors. Sometimes the sun can be there, but there's no heat. Hence the reason why we have these greenhouses. Because there's a certain temperature that's required for that seed to crack open. So what we have essentially said, there are two factors. I might have the best soil, I might have the best seed, but if the environmental factors are not conducive, that seed will never reach the potential that it contains within it. Nor will the soil be able to provide what it wants to provide into the seed. So we've come to a conclusion. There are essentially two factors which determine the actual potential being achieved of a simple seed and soil becoming a tree. One of them is pre-germinating, a pre-germinating phase, and the second one is post-germinating, without getting too technical, inshallah. I promise this is not a lesson in, gardening. I promise this is not a lesson. This is an illustration of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said. He has made this similitude for us to ponder and reflect and come to an understanding worthy of our understanding. But what is it that He wants us to come to? What is the conclusion that He wants us to come to? Hence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never makes a comparison like this. There has to be an intricate reasoning behind that. So, we've said, and we've mentioned very clearly, pre-germinating refers to what? Nature. Post-germinating refers to nurture. So we've come to an understanding very simply. The two factors which have an influence on a seed and soil becoming its true potential are in fact nature and nurture. And this debate, and I will ask you a question, because I don't believe in these monologue type of majalis, I believe in an interactive one. So I would like those of you, inshallah, that are sat here, to inshallah involve themselves with me and inshallah come to an aspect. And the aspect is this. We've said quite clearly within a seed there are hidden traits, characteristics that need to be manifested. And they are locked away and up to the governorship determined by nature and nurture. A human being is also very similar to this. And this is the question we need to ask ourselves. This is the derivation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is indicating towards us. The conclusion that He wants us to take us towards. A sacred tree and a filthy tree. One is referred to as the tree of Ahlul Bayt, and the other one is known as the tree of Banu Umayyah. And those trees have existed before the Prophet and continue even till today. And it's the same thing with this filthy tree. Existed before the time of Adam and continues even till today. Please recite one loud salawat. So the question is this: does this have a bearing, an influence on why you and I are the way we are? How much of our traits, characteristics, personality, behavior, essentially who we are? If I was to say, for example, and I'm sorry for the example, I'll take your apologies already, inshallah accept my apologies as well. So we have Dr. Saab here, and I'm staying with him, so that's why I'm giving the example. So our Dr. Saab here, I've just had the pleasure of getting to know him over this past day or so, and it's been a traumatic couple of days, not because of Dr. Saab, because of what we've been through, right? Near life death experiences, they bond you, they say, right? So we've had that bonding experience. If I was to describe and say, we have Dr. Saab here, and mashallah, you can all get an idea of how his personality is. For example, if I said, this is a person who's always smiling, always happy and joyful. He is somebody who's concerned with, making sure as a host he's very, very attentive. He's very nice company to be around. And I carry on describing these particular traits, characteristics, and personality. Everybody will say, yes, that sounds like Dr. Saab. So, what does that mean? Who we actually are is nothing more than our traits, our characteristics, and our personality. That's who we are. But we also find that there are differences amongst us. So, if I started describing somebody outside of this community with certain traits, we could also understand them with having certain traits, characteristics, and personalities different to our dear doctor here. So the point is, there are essentially certain things that we identify with. But the question is, what makes us us and somebody else somebody else? Why is it that we are the way we are and other people the way they are? In other words, what is it that forms who we are? Please recite one loud salawat. So the essential question I'm asking you is this: how much of our traits, characteristics, personality, behavior, essentially who we are, how much of that is attributed, and can we say is attributed to our nature, in other words, our inherited genes and genealogy? And I don't want anybody to start blaming mum and dad quite right now, inshallah. And how much of it is due to the environment, the nurture? How much of who we are is nature, and how much is attributed to nurture? Is one more than the other? Or is one actually the real reason for why we are and the other something secondary? Or is nature the real cause of what we are? Now this debate of nature versus nurture, it's very old. It's a very old debate. For example, we have a 17th century philosopher by the name of, he's a French philosopher by the name of René Descartes. Now René, he was a big believer that essentially why you are the way you are and I am the way I am, all depends on and comes down to the fact that there are certain inborn traits that we possess that we come into this world with. In other words, the way we are is based on what we have inherited. In other words, our genes, our nature is already preformed and we just live it out in this world. We're already pre-programmed based on our genes of who we are going to be as people. We have an opposing view by two British philosophers. One of them is John Hobbes. Those of you who've done philosophy, inshallah, will know these individuals. And Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Now, both of these individuals said and emphasized that the role of experience is, in essence, which is what fully contributes to why our behavior is the way it is. So they say, it's got nothing to do with your genes that you have, it's all to do with your environment that you grow up in. Nature versus nurture. Then there's a third gentleman. You might not have heard of him, but you've definitely heard of his cousin. This gentleman's name is Francis Galton. Francis Galton was the first cousin of Charles Darwin. I'm sure you've all heard of Charles Darwin, right? I've heard that this is an educated community, hence the reason why we're taking this role, right? Inshallah. So, Francis Galton, he wrote a book. And the book was basically, his works was referred to as Englishman of Science, and in which he wrote an aspect which is nature and nurture. And he discusses two things, genetics and environment. And he says, nature and nurture are two convenient words which are in essence separated, but are in essence talking about what makes a personality. He then says, nature, and this is the definition, he says, nature is all that man brings with himself into the world, and nurture is every influence that affects him after birth. So, this is where you participate now, inshallah. And this is where I want you to, inshallah, accommodate. Because remember, you see, this mimbar is a madrasa. It's not here for you to, like I said, to come from one day and after 10 days we leave with nothing understood, learnt, developed and gone. Imam al-Hussein is not in need of our tears. We are in need of our tears. But what should we cry over? We should cry over him by understanding who he actually is. And we only understand who he is if we start understanding who we are. Please recite aloud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So I ask you a question, and the only thing you have to do is raise your hands. Who thinks, by raising your hand, we are who we are, after all this introduction, based on our nature? In other words, the genetic pool that we come from. Anybody want to raise their hands? Thank you very much. 2 people. Inshallah 3. Who believes it's nurture? In other words, our environment dictates who we are. Okay. So that then leaves one last option. Who thinks that we are in fact a mixture of both? Inshallah, that's everybody. Inshallah. Except Maulana. Don't discredit that, inshallah. Okay. So, nature and nurture. We have said, and we've come to the conclusion, that both of these dictate who we are. We've seen that in an example of a simple germinating cell. Right? So what about us? Well, Islam also believes in a balanced view of both nature and nurture affecting human behavior. It talks about this concept where we should look at both. Both of these things have a relevance. They affect who we are. It talks about where we come from and also the educational environment in which we are raised. For example, we have this very famous, beautiful hadith from the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And the Holy Prophet says this, referring to fitra, which is the nature, in essence, that we are based on. Islam accepts that there are biological factors, psychological factors, physiological factors that govern and decide who we are. So he says, the Holy Prophet, every child is born on a true fitrah, a true faith. And it is the parents that convert that individual child either to Christianity, to Judaism, or any other religion. And the hadith, in essence, is emphasizing and pointing to one particular thing. And we have this in Surah Rum, chapter number 30, verse 30. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها لا تبديل لخلق الله ذلك الدين القيم ولكن الأكثر الناس لا يعلمون. So set your whole being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, upon the religion upright and true in faith, the nature made by Allah, upon which He has made the nature of mankind. There is no change in the nature of creation made by Allah. And that is the upright religion, but most of mankind don't understand. So what is the point of all of this? Well, let's take this to a level where we start understanding. The Holy Prophet himself refers to our environment being extremely important, and this is especially for our youth. The Holy Prophet says, choose your friends extremely carefully. Listen to what he says. He says, Al-mar'u ala deen khalilihi falyanzuri al-mar'u man yukhalil. Man is upon the faith of his friend. Therefore be watchful of whom you befriend. In other words, your environment affects your faith. Instead of making friends with misguided people, because sometimes we get this question, right? We live amongst them. We work with them. Aren't we supposed to interact with them? Indeed we are. Interaction is one thing. Integration is also one thing. Assimilation is something else. Let me just explain these terms. We are told to interact with our environment. It's important to be a component that interacts with this environment. We are also told that we need to integrate. And integration means what? Integration means that a smaller body, a minority, culture, religion, whatever it is part and parcel of a larger community. But there is something. This smaller minority becomes part of the wider community, but holds on to its identity and self-respect. Assimilation is something else. Assimilation says the minority or the smaller group becomes part of the larger group and loses both its identity and its respect or relevant respect, and becomes engulfed, digested, absorbed, and even excreted by that larger body. Islam believes in integration, interaction, integration, but it does not believe in assimilation. It does not want you to forget who you are. It does not want you to lose your sense of identity of being a mu'min Muslim. It also wants you to realize, contribute to society, interact with the people, live amongst them, but don't become so absorbed that you no longer can tell this is an American full stop and this is a Muslim. So the environment, as the Holy Prophet is saying, is really important. Why? Because it dictates and has such an effect that it can change your faith. Because what does the Prophet say? Al-mar'u ala dini khalilihi falyanzur al-mar'u man yukhalil. Man is upon, mankind, male or female, is upon the religion of his friend. So be watchful upon whom you give your friendship to. Friendship isn't something that you just give out like this. He's a nice person, so he becomes my friend. No, for a person who is a believer, he only befriends a true believer. So what does that mean, Maulana? Are we talking about never befriending and not being nice to those people who are not Ithna Ashari Shia? Those who believe in the Wilaya? Are we saying that we should refuse everybody else? Not at all. But what does friendship mean? Friendship means you live and you die for that person who you call your friend or your brother. Are you willing to live and die for people who have completely different principles to you? Friendship isn't something that you give. We talk about respect, being honorable, being respectful to those people who don't follow our faith. Indeed, we need to treat them like Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajahum. That either mankind can be divided into two. Either your brother in faith or your equal, not your brother. We sometimes hear this misquoted. Your brother in faith or your brother in humanity. No. Nazir is something different to Khalil, right? Or Akh. Akhun fid deen means your brother in faith. Nazir or equal or your advisor or somebody that you would call as an equivalent is in humanity. So everybody is part and parcel of your life. But not everybody, based on being a human being externally, becomes your brother. There is a distinction. We have to be humanitarian. We have to be a human being with the people that we live with. But that doesn't mean that we take them as our friend. And just so if there's no doubt, let me read this verse of the Holy Quran to you, just to emphasize this point, so there's no doubt that Maulana is just talking from hadith. No, this is Quran as well. Please recite aloud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in chapter 43, verse 67, Az-Zukhruf, Surah Az-Zukhruf, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Al-akhillau يومئذ بعضهم لبعض عدو إلا المتقين. Subhanallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse is saying, friends on that day, referring to the day of judgment, will be enemies one to the other. Friends on that day, friends in this world will be enemies on that day to one another, except the muttaqeen. Except those who are God conscious. Except those who will be joined with the Imam of the Muttaqeen. Please recite aloud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So we've said taqwa, God consciousness. That's what Muttaqeen refers to. Being of those who are conscious of Allah in every aspect of their life. So we've established today that our environment is very important. Just to finish off of how important this environment is, the Holy Prophet, who's a mercy to mankind, says with reference to how we should choose our friends. Because sometimes when we're at school, at college, at university, oh, this person, his personality seems similar to mine, right? We like the same topics, we like the same sports, we like the same club as far as our football team is concerned. is that the basis upon which friendship should be formed? Just because he comes from the same place as me, or he supports the same football team, or the same basketball team as me? No. Or he's doing the same subject as me. He's studying medicine, or he's studying something else. No, that shouldn't be the basis upon which I give my friendship. Look at the, again, similitude example from the Holy Prophet. He says, the example of a good friend in comparison to a bad one is like that of somebody who sells a musk seller, a perfume seller. And a bad friend like the blacksmith and his bellows. You know the blacksmith, he's an individual who's constantly next to the fire, making and bending iron. Inshallah, I'll drink it now. Allahumma salli ala Please bear with me today a little bit. We're already one majlis behind, so I'm trying to make sure that we can cover everything, inshallah, in this time period. I won't take too much longer, I promise. Please recite aloud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the Holy Prophet is saying that the example of a good friend in comparison to a bad one is like the good friend is somebody who sells musk, perfume, and the bad friend is somebody who is the blacksmith with his bellows making a furnace. This is a Prophet's example. The Prophet says, from the musk seller, the good friend, even if you don't buy, you have the opportunity to buy smelling good fragrance. But even if you don't buy from him, being around him and his shop, what happens? You go into a shop, what happens? Even if you don't buy, you get the ability to test. You always come out smelling of roses, so to speak, right? You always come out smelling nice. So being around a good friend, even if you don't take from his qualities, makes you fragrant. Then the Holy Prophet says, being and befriending somebody who is like a bad character is like befriending a blacksmith with his furnace. And the chances are, if you don't get burnt yourself, or your house doesn't get burnt because of the fact that he's always playing with fire, you will at the very least, your clothes will smell of the furnace. And who knows how hard it is to take that smell when you get a furnace that you've been next to for 5 minutes. But if you're with this friend at all times, you will pick up that bad fragrance. Even though you may say, he's his own person, I am my own person, he has his characteristics, I have my own personality and characteristics. No, being around that person rubs off on you. Even his fragrance, even his bad smell. So we start realizing that Islam gives a great importance to the environment that we grow up in, and says and regards it as being a very important influencing factor to who we are. Which is what the essential question I started today with is, why are we the way we are? So we mentioned this aspect. Indeed, we are affected by our environment. These things do have an influence on making us who we are. So inshallah, we've established that aspect without any doubt. Now the other aspect, inshallah, which I think again is very important, is what about the nature? We've spoken about nurture. Now, how does Islam regard the nature and that's effect on us? And this, inshallah, will be the last point. Inshallah, we will continue from here onwards tomorrow. Please recite aloud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions very clearly, very distinctly, and we recite this all the time, especially on a Thursday night, Surah Yasin. For those of you who know, Surah Yasin is which chapter? 36. 36, chapter 36, verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Subhanalladhi khalaq al-azwaja kullaha mimma tunbitu al-ardu wa min anfusihim wa mimma la ya'lamun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, glory to Allah who created in pairs all things that the earth produces, as well as their own humankind, and also other things that they have no knowledge of. Pairs. Very important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to realize one thing. Every single thing, at the very least, comes as a pair. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only thing which is unique. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only thing which is odd. I don't mean that in a negative manner. I mean that in the mathematical manner of odd and even. Right? He is the only thing which is unique. And true, odd beyond comprehension. Odd is something that we don't understand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unique. He's making us realize that He's created everything, as He stated, from this earth, from ourselves, and from things that we do not know, everything in pairs. Why is this significant? Well, with reference to us, it's significant here. Again, specifically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, and for brevity's sake, I'll just recite in English, Surah Al-Najm, chapter 53, verses 45 and 46. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in verse 45, and He did create in pairs, male and female. And from a seed, verse 46, from a seed when lodged in its place, min nutfatin idha tumna, from a seed which is lodged in its place. He created from male and female, from a seed which is lodged in its place. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to teach us one thing. You and I, we are in essence a result. In fact, every single human being is a result of, in essence, two components. Our mother and also our father. The genetic material that makes us who we are has a relevance. And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, 1400 years ago, mentions and talks about genetics in the Holy Quran with specific reference to who we are. For example, reference to chromosomes and our genetic makeup. Surah An-Nisa, chapter number 4, verse 23. And again, I will be very brief here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُكُمْ وَأَخَوَاتُكُمْ, and so forth. Basically what is being referred to here is this. The prohibitions of who we can't marry. Right? Prohibited for you in marriage are your mothers, your daughters, your sisters, your father's sisters, your mother's sisters, your brother's daughters, etc., etc., etc. Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala referring to this? The main reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing to this is teaching us that an incestuous relationship is prohibited. Why? Because you will produce genetically weak individuals. You take any society where there's been a culture of incest, what do you find? There's a weakening of the genes. What's produced is actually defective. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 1400 years ago is teaching us that genes are extremely important. And there is a means by which you go about selecting and producing the right type of person from day one. So we have to be very careful about who we choose. Again, coming back to the whole point, the aim of seed and soil is what? To produce good fruits. That's what a planter of a seed does. As parents, we should also want the same, right? We should also want to produce the most healthiest fruits that we can possibly have from what we have in our control. So, somebody may say, I want to produce the best type of fruits. I have the best type of seeds. I'm looking for the best type of soil. If he's able to source the right type of soil, he will produce the best type of fruits. Hence the reason why we now find the Holy Prophet saying, marry women that are loving and fertile. In other words, the land has to be fertile. The Prophet also says and warns us and says, be careful of marrying a beautiful woman from bad or evil or filthy sources. For example, he says to his companions, he says, be careful of the luscious green grass that grows on manure. The companion says, Ya Rasulullah, what is this green luscious grass that grows on manure? He says, a beautiful woman with filthy origins. In other words, where the background of the forefathers is not good. So again, furthermore, the Holy Prophet says, choose for your seed a good mother, for indeed breeding is a strategy. Subhanallah. The Holy Prophet is teaching us 1400 years ago about nature and nurture. He's showing us how these two factors play such a significant role in producing the right types of fruits, flowers, and leaves. And all of this shows us how important and how influential the genetic and the biological factors are on our behavior and our mental processes. And let us look and analyze when it comes to inheritance and inherited genes and traits, to that an individual whose eulogy we recite in the form of ziyarat al-warith. Ziyarat waritha, what does it mean? It's actually a eulogy. You know what a eulogy is? It's praise. We are talking about, when we recite ziyarat warith, we are talking about an individual who was the inheritor of all the most perfect genetic and otherwise material. We say in ziyarat al-warith, I'm sure you recited this yesterday, we say, Assalamu alayka ya waritha Adam as-safwatillah. We say, oh, peace and blessings be upon you, O inheritor of Adam, the chosen one. We say, Assalamu alayka ya waritha Nuhin nabiyallah. Peace be upon you, O inheritor of Nuh, the prophet of Allah. We say, Assalamu alayka ya waritha Ibrahim khalilullah. Peace be upon you, O inheritor of Ibrahim, the friend of Allah. We continue, we say, Assalamu alayka ya waritha Musa kalimullah. Peace and blessings be upon you, O inheritor of Moses, the one who talked to Allah. Assalamu alayka ya waritha Isa ruhillah. Peace be upon you, O inheritor of Isa, the Spirit of Allah. We say, Assalamu alayka ya waritha Muhammadin Habiballah. Peace be upon you, O inheritor of Muhammad, the beloved of Allah, the friend of Allah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alayka ya waritha Amir al-Mu'mineen Waliyullah. Peace be upon you, O inheritor of Ali, the commander of the faithful and the friend of Allah. Assalamu alayka yabna Muhammadin al-Mustafa. Assalamu alayka yabna Ali al-Murtada. So forth and so forth. In other words, we come to the point where we start saying, Assalamu alayka yabna Fatima al-Zahra. Assalamu alayka yabna Khadija al-Kubra. We are saying, peace and blessings be upon you, O he who inherited from the Holy Prophet, and Amir al-Mu'mineen, and Fatima al-Zahra, and Khadija al-Kubra. Let's have one loud salat. Salawat for Allah. So with regards to Imam al-Hussein, who is the inheritor of all the traits, the characteristics, the personality, the genetic material, from this shajaratul tayyibah, from this pure, sacred family tree. This is who Imam al-Hussein is. We recite Ziyarat al-Waritha, but we don't know what we're saying. We don't understand the implication of what we are actually saying. We are saying the one who inherited all of these great traits. Why are we talking about Adam all the way till Khatim? Because genes are inherited, traits are inherited, characteristics are inherited. All of these have a manifestation of who and what we are. Just so that there remains no doubt, in the very same ziyarah, what do we say with regards to this family tree coming to a particular point? In reference to his father, Amir al-Mu'mineen, and his mother, Fatima al-Zahra, salamullah alayha. On one hand, we have the commander of the faithful, the leader of the God conscious. On the other hand, we have a lady who the Holy Prophet refers to as Abiha, the mother of her father, and also the leader of all women of all time, and even of heaven. This is the genetic pooling by which we are referring to. And again, in Ziyarat al-Warith, we refer to these points when we say, and we recite these words, but do we reflect and ponder to what they really refer to? Bismillah, we say, أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأسلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة. I bear witness. We recite this every Thursday. I bear witness that verily you were the light in the sublime loins, referring to Amir al-Mu'mineen, and the purified womb. Seed, soil. Why are we making this declaration? We're making this declaration for a lesson for us to understand what it means to come from purified loins and purified wombs. Then go on to say, لَمْ تُنَجِّسْكَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةُ بِأَنْجَاسِهَا. The impurities of ignorance did not even touch you. And the final statement, وَلَمْ تُلْبِسْكَ مِنْ مُدْلَحِمَاتِ الثِّيَابِهَا. Nor could its soiled, dirty bearings even smear you. All we are talking about is the pure seed and the pure soil. About how both of these genetic factors are so relevant in who we are here to mourn. This individual, the inheritor of prophets, and the best of prophets, and not just the prophets, but the king and queen of heaven and earth. This is an individual, my dear brothers and sisters. This is an individual that when we realize and we come to an understanding, this is the body, this is the state of the inheritor of all the prophets, of all that was good in traits and characteristics. And this body, my dear brothers and sisters, is now lying on the sands of Karbala 3 days without being buried. This is a body, my dear brothers and sisters. This is Abu Abdullah Imam al-Hussein. This is an individual who is the best of mankind on the face of this earth, who inherited all this greatness. And this is a body which has been beaten by stone. This is a body that's been stabbed by spears. This is a body which has been pierced by arrows. This is a body that has been killed and beheaded. This is a body, even after all of that, whose body is trampled and crushed under the hooves of horses. This is a body, my dear brothers and sisters, that has been even stripped of the clothing that covered the body. This is a body which now lies naked on the lands of Karbala. This is a body which Rasulullah used to carry on his back. This is a body that Rasulullah used to kiss. Amir al-Mu'mineen used to kiss. This is a body that Fatima Zahra salamullah alayha used to bless and dress and wash. My dear brothers and sisters, this is the state of the inheritor of all the best that mankind had to offer. And it's lying on the plains of Karbala. My dear brothers and sisters, don't be surprised when we hear that on these 3 days, the clouds and the horizons turned dark. The clouds and the skies rained blood, and it's documented in the Western documents as well as the Eastern. Don't be surprised, my dear brothers and sisters, when people came to think that doomsday was upon them because they could see stars by day crashing into one another. They say that for these 3 days there was no light on this earth. How could it be? We know when prophets were born that there were stars that you could see during the night and the day. We've heard of a Christian monk who took out, at the time of Imam al-Radha, just a simple bone and placed it under the sky, and the heavens opened up and poured with rain. And this was just a bone of a prophet which hadn't been cut or broken or chopped. This was just a simple bone. and the clouds opened up and poured out in rain. But why are we surprised when the whole body, the one who inherited all that the prophets had to give, he's lying not just one bone, his whole bones are scattered and broken. His whole body is there, open and naked, in front of the open skies. How can the sun remain? How can the clouds remain without pouring blood onto this earth? And indeed, that is exactly what happened. This body was only covered, my dear brothers and sisters, by the suns. It's the sun that covered the body of Abu Abdullah. This body remained in this state. And this was a sign for all of mankind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is Nur as-samawati wal ard, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we recite in Surah An-Nur, He is the light of the heavens and the earth. How can the light of the heavens and the earth remain a light when the inheritor and his representative on earth is in this state? My dear brothers and sisters, this is the state and this is the tragedy of Abu Abdullah Imam al-Hussein. For 3 days, his body remains in this state. Head severed, body trampled, and not even the clothes. They say they even stripped him of his sandals. There was one individual who tried to take off the ring that Imam al-Hussein had, but because the body had become inflamed and because it's swollen, he couldn't take the ring off. Do you know what this la'een did? He chops the finger of Abu Abdullah just to take the ring. Imam al-Hussein asked for 3 pieces of clothing to Sayyidah Zainab Salamullah alayha. And he tore each piece of clothing. And when Sayyidah Zainab asked him, "Oh my brother, why are you tearing these clothes?" He says, "In the hope that these people, after they have finished with my body, that they allow the dignity of remaining, for there to be one piece of clothing to remain on my body. But these individuals, these worse than animal, these enemies of Allah, even stripped the body of Abu Abdullah of even these clothes." Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliyyi al-azim. Saya'lamu alladhina ظلموا وَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Please raise your hand, brothers and sisters. Let us make a sincere supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the sake of Abu Abdullah, to allow us to be of those who truly understand their nature that you have created them on, and also the nature that they find themselves in, and directed towards the right path. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify our thoughts, our hearts, and our actions. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us subservient to His command. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us to remain attached to those that are His beloveds. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive every single sin that we may have committed up to this date. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the sake of Imam as-Sajjad and his state of illness, that if there is anybody who is ill or sick from amongst us here, from our near and dear ones, from the community at large, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give them the shifa and allow them to be cured and be healthy. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy on all our marhumeen who are no longer with us in this world. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is our final and greatest dua, to hasten the reappearance of the Imam and the proof and his hujjah on this earth, and allow us to become of those who come to his aid and are there to sacrifice our lives in his way. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وآل محمد. رحم الله من يقرأ الفاتحة مع الصلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. يا حسين.